Hi, I just came back from Cambodia. But I almost didn't get there. Like everyone else, I was suffering pandemic fatigue and I just wanted to get out of the endless lockdowns in Malaysia. Then, Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen suddenly announced that the kingdom was open to travelers without quarantine. I jumped at the chance to travel. I had initially wanted to visit Thailand that only required 1 day of quarantine, but since Cambodia didn't require any quarantine, I went to the Kingdom of Cambodia. At that time, AirAsia had not started their Cambodia route, so I bought a Jetstar ticket. I had to fly from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore before I got to Phnom Penh. And I did everything by the book. Tried not to leave anything to chance. Did my PCR test 72 hours before flight. I carefully calculated the hours to ensure I complied with the rule. Then I tried to get the PCR test result document signed by a doctor and stamped by him. But I was told by them that there was no need because that thing was an official document and it had a QR code. And if anybody doubted that it was unofficial or it was fake, they could just scan the QR code. So they told me no signature was required. But some people said that they were turned back because there was no signature on their PCR QR test result document. I even bought Forte COVID-19 insurance for Cambodia. It's not mandatory anymore, but I thought I had to have it, so I bought it. And that thing cost me 150 US dollars. Yeah. On the day of departure, I arrived at KLIA 2 to check in at the Jetstar counter 3 hours before time. After lining up for about half an hour, I was told I could not fly. Number 1, the PCR test needs to be chopped and signed. 2, the PCR test shown that I'd taken it 4 days before flight. And transit at Singapore requires 48 hours of PCR test result, not 72. And I didn't have a return ticket. So that was the end of my journey. Well, of course, after buying the ticket, going for a PCR test and buying the expensive insurance, you think I'm going to give up without a fight? So I stood there and said, I'm flying. But of course, Jetstar didn't inform me of the special requirement by the Singapore government. It seems that they require 48 hours of PCR tests, not 72. Right. Now, Cambodia requires you to take your test 72 hours before you reach their country. But Singapore, 48 hours only. And these 72 hours, it's calculated backwards by day. So since I was flying on Saturday is 1 day, then it's Friday, Thursday. So I should have taken my test on Thursday, not Wednesday. You don't count the hours. But of course, nobody told me that lah. So I stood at the counter and argued with the Jetstar supervisor. But you and I know he is just following instructions. Finally, I told him, let me fly. I'll take my chances with the Cambodian airport officials there. So he told me, okay, but I still needed to get that COVID-19 test for Singapore, and I need to get it now. So where to get COVID-19 PCR test and get it immediately? It's impossible. After talking for about 10 minutes, then only he told me, actually, Singapore doesn't require you to have a PCR test. You can just take an RTK test. And I could get the RTK test at the airport itself. BP Labs had set up a counter just for that. So I thought, okay lah, just go and get lah. RTK test is really cheap, right? When we do it at home, it's only 5 ringgit. And if you do it anywhere else, it's like 30 ringgit or something like that, right? Well, guess how much BP Labs charged me that day? 200 ringgit. 100 ringgit was for the test. 100 ringgit was for the cost of the person wearing that white color, that white overall suit thing. Yeah, so total cost, 200 ringgit. Then I had to go to the airport clinic to get my PCR test chopped and signed. That was 30 ringgit. And with that, I was allowed to board at KLIA. I landed in Singapore and I was quite relieved that no one pulled me out the line to look at my COVID-19 test results. Okay, 2 hours waiting at Singapore for transit, then I took my flight to Phnom Penh. Now, during that flight, I could not sleep. Normally, I would sleep in the airplane, but this time, I just could not sleep. I kept thinking over and over again, what would the officials at the Phnom Penh airport ask me? And what kind of answers should I give them? You know, would they quarantine me? Would they ask me to take a PCR test at the airport? Would I have to bribe them? Or worse, would I have to buy a ticket and just return home immediately? Throughout the entire flight, I just couldn't sleep. I was just totally restless and totally worried that I would have to turn around and come back home to Malaysia. Anyway, I arrived at the Phnom Penh airport and we all had to present our COVID-19 documents. And I thought, I know, I'll take out everything. I'll take out all of my documents and hand it to the person. And maybe when the person is checking, he'll be confused and not look at my PCR test dates carefully, you know. But the person looked at it very slowly. Documents that were not needed were just returned back to me. And then he held that PCR test in his hand, the document. He circled the date, ticked it, stamped it, gave it back to me, and moved me on to the next counter. I was through. I thought I would be stopped, but I was through. After the next counter, I got my passport stamped, visa exemption for ASEAN citizens, 30 days, no questions. And then I was given another COVID-19 test. I think it was PCR. This was free at the Phnom Penh airport. And 15 minutes later, they told me, they called my name up, and I could go out the airport. And that was the start of my holiday in Cambodia.